I thought I knew my husband better than anyone. We'd been married for 15 years, shared a home, raised two beautiful children together, built what I believed was a life of trust and partnership. But one phone call on a Tuesday evening changed everything I thought I understood about my marriage. He planned a family vacation, packed the bags, booked the flights, arranged the hotels, and somehow, inexplicably, I wasn't invited. It wasn't the first time. And what I discovered next revealed a truth about my marriage I was never meant to see. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The call came while I was finishing the dinner dishes. My hands were still wet when I grabbed my phone from the counter, and I remember the exact pattern of soap bubbles sliding down the screen as I answered. It was David, my husband, and his voice had that distant quality it always got when he was trying to sound casual about something that wasn't casual at all. "Hey, so I've been meaning to talk to you about Thanksgiving," he started, and I could hear highway noise in the background. He was driving home from work, stuck in the usual traffic on the interstate. "Mom's planned this big family gathering at the lake house. She's really excited about it. The kids are going to love it." I smiled, already mentally planning what I'd pack, thinking about the crisp autumn air by the water, the way the lake would look with the trees changing color around it. "That sounds wonderful," I said, reaching for a dish towel. "How many days should I plan for? I'll need to request time off from work." There was a pause just a beat too long, and in that silence I felt something shift. "Well, that's the thing," David continued, his words coming faster now, like he wanted to get them out before he lost his nerve. "Mom specifically requested it be just her, me, the kids, and my sister's family. She wants it to be, just blood family. She's getting older, and she wants this special time with her grandchildren and her own children. I hope you understand." I stood there, dish towel in hand, water dripping onto the kitchen floor, trying to process what I'd just heard. "I'm sorry, what?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, higher pitched than normal. "You're taking our children on a family vacation without me? How is that a family vacation if I'm not there? I'm their mother. I'm your wife." David sighed, and I could picture him rubbing his forehead the way he always did when he was frustrated. "I knew you'd react like this. It's just a few days, Rachel. It's not a big deal. My mother has this vision of her family all together, and she's been planning this for months. I can't disappoint her now. The kids are already excited about it." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the familiarity of it all, the déjà vu that washed over me as I stood in my kitchen, feeling like a guest in my own life. Because this wasn't the first time I'd been excluded from family events. This wasn't even the second or third time. This was a pattern I'd been ignoring for years, making excuses for, convincing myself it was normal, that I was being oversensitive, that family dynamics were just complicated sometimes. I thought back to the summer before, when David had taken the kids to his parents' beach house for a week. "It's just going to be cramped," he'd said then. "Mom and Dad's place is small, and with my sister and her kids there too, there's barely enough room. You'd be uncomfortable. Why don't you use the time to relax at home, have some time to yourself?" At the time, I'd actually believed him. I'd convinced myself it was a gift, this week of solitude. I'd read books, taken long baths, slept in late. But every time I'd called to talk to my children, I'd heard laughter in the background, the sounds of a family enjoying themselves, and I'd felt a hollow ache in my chest that I couldn't quite name. Before that, there was the Christmas 2 years ago when David's family had decided to go skiing in Colorado. "You don't ski," David had reminded me, as if that settled everything. "You'd just be sitting in the lodge by yourself while the rest of us are on the slopes. That doesn't sound fun for you. Stay home, have a peaceful Christmas, and we'll celebrate when we get back." I'd spent Christmas Day alone, eating leftover Chinese food and watching old movies, telling myself I was fine, that this was what being a good wife looked like, being flexible and understanding and not making waves. And then there was the spring break trip to Disney World, planned and executed while I was visiting my sick mother across the country. It was last minute, David had explained when I'd found the photos on his phone weeks later. "The tickets came up cheap, and I knew you were busy with your mom. I didn't want to bother you with it." I'd stared at those photos for hours, pictures of my children grinning with Mickey Mouse, David's arm around his mother, his sister, and her family all gathered together in front of Cinderella's castle, and I wasn't in a single frame. It was as if I didn't exist, as if I was a ghost in my own family story. And then I noticed something strange. As I stood there in my kitchen that Tuesday evening, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to David explain why his mother's wishes were more important than my presence at a family gathering, a memory surfaced that made my blood run cold. It was from the previous month, just a casual moment I hadn't thought much about at the time. I'd been folding laundry in our bedroom when David's phone, charging on the nightstand, had buzzed with a text message. The screen had lit up just long enough for me to see the preview. "Don't forget to book the flights without her knowing. Mom wants it to be a surprise." The message had been from David's sister, Jennifer. At the time, I'd assumed I was someone else, maybe a cousin I didn't know well, someone they were planning a surprise party for. I'd thought nothing of it and had gone back to folding towels and sorting socks. But now, standing in my kitchen with soap suds drying on my hands, I realized with a sickening clarity that I was me. Rachel. They'd been planning this exclusion for months, coordinating behind my back, having conversations about how to keep me out of the loop, making sure I wouldn't interfere with their real family gathering. "I need to go," I said quietly into the phone, and before David could respond, I ended the call. My hands were shaking now, and I set the phone down carefully on the counter, afraid I might throw it against the wall if I held it any longer. I walked to the living room where my children were watching television, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. Emma was 12, with David's dark hair and my green eyes. Lucas was 9, all energy and enthusiasm, currently sprawled on the carpet with his homework spread out around him. They were my entire world, these two beautiful humans I'd brought into existence, nurtured, loved with every fiber of my being. And apparently, they were being taught that it was perfectly acceptable to exclude their mother from family events. "Hey, guys," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk for a minute?" Emma looked up, immediately sensing something was wrong. She'd always been perceptive, my daughter, able to read emotions in a room like some people read books. "What's wrong, Mom?" she asked, muting the television. Lucas glanced up from his homework, his pencil still poised over his math problems. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but it wasn't. I sat down on the couch, trying to figure out how to have this conversation, how to ask my children what they knew without putting them in an impossible position between their parents. Dad mentioned something about a trip to Grandma's lake house for Thanksgiving. I began carefully. "What do you know about that?" Emma and Lucas exchanged a glance, one of those sibling communications that happens without words, and I saw guilt flash across both their faces. "Dad said it was supposed to be a surprise," Lucas said finally, his voice small. "He said Grandma wanted to have special time with just her kids and grandkids." The way he said it, the hesitation before, just told me he understood exactly who was being excluded and that it didn't sit right with him either. My heart broke a little more. "And how do you feel about that?" I asked, reaching out to smooth his hair back from his forehead. "About going on a family trip without me?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I told Dad it wasn't right," she said fiercely. "I told him you should come too. But he said Grandma was really insistent and that we shouldn't make a big deal about it because it would just cause problems. He said you'd understand, that you always understand." The phrase, "you always understand," hit me like a physical blow. How many times had I heard that over the years? How many times had I swallowed my hurt feelings, buried my objections, smiled and nodded, and played the role of the easygoing wife who never caused problems? I'd been so busy being understanding that I'd allowed myself to become optional in my own family. "Listen to me, both of you," I said, pulling them close. "I need you to know something important. A real family, a healthy family, doesn't exclude people. A real family doesn't make plans behind someone's back and then expect everyone to just go along with it. What your grandmother and father are doing isn't okay, and I need you to understand that it's not your fault. None of this is your fault." Lucas leaned into me, and I felt his tears soaking through my shirt. "Does this mean we're not going?" he asked. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to unpack. Because this wasn't just about one Thanksgiving trip. This was about years of being sidelined, marginalized, treated as less than a full member of the family I'd married into. This was about the fundamental disrespect that had been shown to me, again and again, while I'd smiled and nodded and told myself it was fine. Would you have confronted him at this point? Would you have packed your bags and left? Or would you have done what I did, which was put my children to bed, kiss their foreheads, and then sit alone in my darkened living room, waiting for my husband to come home so I could finally, after 15 years of swallowing my voice, tell him exactly how I felt? David walked through the door at 7:30, his tie loosened and his briefcase heavy with the work he'd bring to the home office later that night. He stopped when he saw me sitting there in the dark, and I watched understanding dawn across his face. He knew this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "Rachel," he started, but I held up my hand to stop him. "I want you to listen to me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning in my chest. "I'm going to talk, and you're going to listen, and you're not going to interrupt or explain or justify. You're just going to hear me. Can you do that?" He nodded slowly, setting down his briefcase and taking a seat in the armchair across from me, his hands folded in his lap like a child waiting to be disciplined. Good. That's exactly how he should feel. "For 15 years, I have been a good wife to you," I began. "I've supported your career, even when it meant putting my own on hold. I've raised our children, managed our household, maintained relationships with your family, even when they made it clear I wasn't really part of the club. I've been flexible, understanding, accommodating. I've swallowed my hurt feelings more times than I can count because I didn't want to be the difficult wife, the demanding one, the one who caused problems." David opened his mouth to speak, but I shook my head. "I'm not finished. Every time your family has planned something without me, I've told myself there was a reasonable explanation. The beach house was too small. I don't ski. It was last minute. But now I see the truth. They don't want me there, and you've been complicit in that exclusion. You've chosen your mother's comfort over my dignity. You've allowed your family to treat me as if I'm not really your wife, not really your children's mother, not really part of the family at all." The words were pouring out now, years of suppressed feelings finally finding their voice. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to see pictures of my own children on a family vacation I wasn't invited to? Do you know what it's like to spend holidays alone while my husband and kids are off making memories without me? Do you understand that you've been teaching our children that this behavior is acceptable, that it's normal to exclude people, to make plans behind their backs, to prioritize some family members over others?" A tear rolled down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. I wanted David to see what his choices had done, to witness the pain he'd been so carefully avoiding. "And the worst part," I continued, my voice breaking now, "is that I let it happen. I enabled this pattern by being so damn understanding all the time. I convinced myself that being a good wife meant never making waves, never standing up for myself, never demanding to be treated with basic respect. But I'm done with that. I'm done being understanding about being disrespected." David's face had gone pale, and I could see his hands trembling slightly where they gripped the arms of the chair. "Rachel, he started, but I cut him off again. I said I wasn't finished. I've been thinking about all the trips, all the gatherings, all the events I've been excluded from, and I've realized something. This isn't just about your mother's preferences or space constraints or any of the other excuses you've given me. This is about control. Your mother wants to control who's included in her family, and you've given her that power. You've allowed her to decide that I'm not really family, that I'm just some outsider who happened to marry her son. And by going along with it, by making excuses for her, by lying to me and hiding plans from me, you've told me that her feelings matter more than mine. Her comfort matters more than my dignity. Her wishes matter more than our marriage." The silence that followed was deafening. David sat there, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, guilt and defensiveness, and something that might have been realization dawning in his eyes. "I never thought of it that way," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to keep the peace. My mother can be so difficult when she doesn't get her way, and I thought it was easier to just go along with what she wanted rather than fight about it. I never meant to hurt you." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's the problem, David. You never meant to hurt me, but you did it anyway, over and over again. And the fact that you never thought about how your actions would affect me, that you prioritized keeping peace with your mother over respecting your wife, that tells me everything I need to know about where I stand in this marriage. But that wasn't all I discovered. After David had gone to bed that night, after our conversation had dissolved into him apologizing profusely and me feeling too emotionally exhausted to continue, I'd done something I'd never done before in our entire marriage. I'd gone through his phone. I'm not proud of it, but I'd reached a point where I needed to know the truth, the whole truth, not just the carefully edited version David chose to share with me. What I found made me physically ill. There were group text chains going back years, conversations between David, his mother, and his sister, discussing their various family gatherings and trips. And in every single conversation, there were messages about how to handle the Rachel situation. His mother: we need to make sure Rachel doesn't find out about the Colorado trip until after we've left. She'll try to guilt you into staying home. Jennifer: maybe we could tell her the beach house is being renovated? That way she won't feel excluded, just disappointed about the timing. David: I'll handle Rachel. She's usually pretty understanding about these things. His mother: she's too clingy. A wife should understand that a man needs time with his birth family without interference. Jennifer: at least the kids will have real family memories without her hovering over everything. I read through months and months of these conversations, my hands shaking, bile rising in my throat. They hadn't just been excluding me from trips. They'd been systematically working to erase me from the family narrative, to create a version of David's life where I was just a peripheral figure, easily removed from the picture whenever they wanted real family time. There were messages about holidays where they'd actively worked to schedule events when they knew I'd be busy with work or visiting my own family. There were conversations about my personality flaws and how I was too sensitive and always making everything about her. There were even messages where David had complained to his mother about arguments we'd had, allowing her to paint me as the unreasonable one, the difficult wife who didn't understand that sometimes a man needed space from his spouse. But the message that broke me completely was one from just a few months ago. David's mother had written: I don't know why you married someone who wasn't really one of us. Your father and I raised you better than that. At least we can make sure the children know where they really belong. And David's response had been: I know, Mom. Sometimes I wonder the same thing. I'd sat there on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m, reading those words over and over again, trying to reconcile them with the man I'd married, the man who'd promised to love and cherish me, who'd stood in front of our families and friends and vowed to make me his partner in everything. And now I understood that I'd never really been his partner. I'd been a placeholder, a woman he'd married for reasons I was only beginning to question, but never someone he'd truly integrated into his real life, his real family. The next morning, I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I made breakfast, packed lunches, got the kids off to school, all while David watched me nervously, clearly afraid of what was coming next. He'd seen something in my eyes the night before that had frightened him, a hardness he wasn't used to seeing, and now he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I went through your phone last night, I said finally, after the kids had left and we were alone in the kitchen. David's face went white. Rachel, I can explain. Can you? I asked, pulling out my own phone where I'd taken screenshots of the most damaging conversations. Can you explain this one where your mother calls me clingy and you agree with her? Or this one where you actively lie to me about why I can't come on a trip? Or maybe this one, where your mother says she doesn't know why you married someone who wasn't one of them, and you say you sometimes wonder the same thing. I watched him read through the screenshots, watched the blood drain from his face, watched him try to formulate words that wouldn't come. There was no excuse good enough, no explanation that could make this okay, and we both knew it. I think I want a divorce, I said quietly, and the words felt both terrifying and liberating at the same time. I can't stay in a marriage where I'm constantly being told I'm not enough, where I have to fight for basic respect, where my own husband agrees with his mother that marrying me was a mistake. David's eyes filled with tears. No, Rachel, please. I don't want a divorce. I love you. I know I've messed up, I know I've hurt you, but we can fix this. I'll talk to my mother, I'll set boundaries, I'll make this right. But I was already shaking my head. For 3 years, they'd been doing this to me, systematically excluding me, and I'd finally reached the point where I couldn't pretend anymore that love was enough to overcome disrespect. You had 15 years to set boundaries with your mother, I said. You had 15 years to stand up for me, to defend me, to make it clear that I was your priority. But you didn't. Every single time you had to choose between making your mother happy and treating your wife with respect, you chose your mother. And I'm done being the person you sacrificed to keep the peace with her. David reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Please, he said, and his voice broke on the word. Please don't give up on us. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll go to counseling, I'll cut contact with my mother if that's what you need, I'll prove to you that you matter more than anything. I looked at him, this man I'd spent 15 years with, and tried to find the love I used to feel when I looked at his face. But all I could see was the betrayal, the lies, the years of choosing everyone else's comfort over my dignity. The problem is that I shouldn't have to ask you to prove that I matter, I said softly. In a real marriage, in a healthy marriage, that would be a given. I wouldn't have to beg my husband to include me in family events. I wouldn't have to fight to be treated like I'm actually part of the family. And I wouldn't have to read through secret text messages to discover that my husband sometimes wonders why he married me. The words hung between us, heavy with all the pain of the past 15 years, all the times I'd swallowed my hurt, all the moments I'd convinced myself I was being oversensitive or demanding. But I wasn't the problem. I'd never been the problem. The problem was a family system that saw wives as outsiders, as threats to their precious family bond, as people to be managed and controlled rather than welcomed and loved. I'm going to stay at my sister's for a while, I continued, already mentally packing my bags. I need time to think, time to figure out what I want, time to be away from you and your mother and all of this. David's face crumpled. What about the kids? He asked. What do we tell them? That stopped me cold because I hadn't thought that far ahead. What did we tell our children? How did I explain to them that their father had been complicit in a pattern of exclusion and disrespect? How did I help them understand that sometimes love isn't enough if it comes without respect? And what I discovered next would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my husband's family. In my determination to understand the full scope of what had been happening, I'd contacted David's ex-girlfriend from college, a woman named Sarah, whom I'd met briefly at our wedding years ago. I'd found her on social media and sent her a message, not really expecting a response, just casting out a line to see if there was a pattern here that extended beyond me. Sarah responded within an hour, and what she told me made my blood run cold. She'd dated David for 3 years in college, had been planning a future with him, had even met his family multiple times. And she'd experienced the exact same treatment I had. His mother never accepted me, Sarah wrote in her message. She always found reasons why I couldn't come to family events. She told David I wasn't their kind of people, that I didn't have the right background, that I was holding him back. And David never defended me. He would apologize privately, tell me his mother would come around eventually, but he never stood up to her. Eventually, I realized I'd always be fighting for a place in his life, and I couldn't do it anymore. I broke up with him, and honestly, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. I stared at that message for a long time, processing what it meant. This wasn't about me at all. This wasn't about my personality or my background or anything I'd done wrong. This was about a mother who had such control over her son that she could dictate who was and wasn't acceptable in his life, and a son who was too weak or too enmeshed to stand up to her. I showed the message to David that evening, and I watched the color drain from his face as he read it. I didn't realize, he said weakly. I didn't see the pattern. But that was a lie, and we both knew it. He'd seen the pattern. He'd just chosen to do nothing about it because it was easier to sacrifice his relationships than to confront his mother. Over the next few days, I learned more. David's sister Jennifer had been through 2 divorces, both times because her husbands couldn't handle the way their mother-in-law inserted herself into every aspect of their marriage. David's cousin had estranged himself from the family entirely after his wife was subjected to years of the same treatment I'd experienced. The pattern was clear, had been clear for decades, but everyone in the family had just accepted it as normal, as the way things were, as the price you paid for being part of this family. But I wasn't willing to pay that price anymore. I filed for divorce on a Friday morning, walked into a lawyer's office with my folder full of screenshots and my timeline of exclusions, and laid out everything that had happened. My lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s named Margaret, listened to my story without interruption, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me. "I've seen this before," she said. "Enmeshed family systems where the adult children never really separate from their parents. It's emotional abuse, what they've done to you. And the fact that your husband enabled it makes him complicit." Hearing her call it abuse was jarring. I'd never thought of it that way. I'd thought of it as rudeness, as insensitivity, as a personality conflict. But abuse? That seemed like too strong a word for what had happened to me. "Abuse isn't always physical," Margaret continued, as if reading my thoughts. "Emotional abuse, systematic exclusion, gaslighting, making you doubt your own perceptions and feelings, that's all abuse. And from what you've told me, that's exactly what happened to you for 15 years. The divorce proceedings were brutal. David fought me on everything, not because he wanted to stay married, I realized, but because divorce meant admitting that his mother had been wrong, that the way they'd treated me had been unacceptable. It meant facing truths he'd been avoiding his entire adult life. His mother hired him an expensive lawyer and coordinated his defense, which somehow seemed fitting. Even in divorce, she was inserting herself into our marriage, trying to control the narrative, trying to make sure that I was painted as the unreasonable one, the wife who had given up too easily, who hadn't tried hard enough to understand their family dynamics. But I had tried. I'd tried for 15 years. And I was done trying. The hearing for custody was particularly painful. David's lawyer tried to paint me as an unstable mother, someone who had abandoned her children by moving out, someone who was trying to alienate the kids from their father's family. But my lawyer had come prepared with testimony from Emma, who was old enough to speak on her own behalf. My 12-year-old daughter stood in front of the judge and said, "My grandmother has never treated my mother with respect. She's always trying to get us to go places without Mom, and it makes me uncomfortable. Dad goes along with it because he doesn't want to fight with Grandma. But it's not right, and I think Mom was brave to finally stand up for herself." Hearing my daughter articulate what I'd been feeling for years brought tears to my eyes. She understood. My child understood that what had been happening wasn't normal, wasn't okay, wasn't something to be tolerated or explained away. The judge awarded me primary custody, with David getting visitation every other weekend and alternating holidays. And critically, the judge added a stipulation that any visitation involving David's extended family had to be approved by me first, given the history of exclusionary behavior. David's mother was furious. She called me repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry accusations to tearful pleas to threats of legal action. I blocked her number after the first day and instructed my lawyer to send a cease and desist letter. I was done being bullied by this woman. I was done trying to win her approval or acceptance. I was done pretending that her behavior was anything other than toxic and controlling. My sister Maria had been my rock through all of this. She'd let me stay in her guest room, had listened to me cry night after night, had reminded me that I was worthy of respect and love and basic human decency. One night, about 6 months into the divorce proceedings, she asked me a question that I'd been avoiding thinking about. "What do you wish you'd done differently?" she asked. We were sitting on her back porch, watching the sunset, drinking wine that was probably too expensive for a weeknight but felt necessary anyway. I thought about her question for a long time. "I wish I'd spoken up the first time it happened," I said finally. "I wish I'd told David that first year that his mother's behavior was unacceptable and that I needed him to set boundaries. I wish I hadn't convinced myself that being understanding meant tolerating disrespect. I wish I'd valued myself enough to demand better treatment instead of always trying to be the cool wife who didn't cause problems." Maria nodded. "You can't change the past," she said. "But you can make sure you never accept that kind of treatment again. You can teach your kids what healthy relationships look like. You can show them that it's okay to have boundaries, to demand respect, to walk away from people who don't treat you well, even if those people are family. She was right, of course. The best thing I could do now was model self-respect for my children, show them what it looked like to stand up for yourself, to refuse to accept crumbs of affection, and call it love. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon, 14 months after I'd first filed. David and I sat across from each other in the courtroom, and I looked at him and felt nothing but a vague sadness for the years we'd wasted, the life we could have built if he'd only been willing to stand up to his mother. After the hearing, David approached me in the hallway. "I'm sorry," he said, and he looked like he meant it. "I'm sorry for everything. You deserved better than what I gave you." I nodded, accepting his apology, but not absolving him. "You're right," I said simply. "I did deserve better. I hope you learn from this, David. I hope your next relationship is different. I hope you finally learn to set boundaries with your mother before she destroys that relationship too." He flinched at my words, but he didn't argue. We both knew I was right. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I heard through mutual friends that David had started dating someone new. And then, 3 months after that, I heard that she'd already met his mother and that the same patterns were starting to emerge. David's mother didn't like this new girlfriend either, was already finding reasons to exclude her from family events, was already working to drive a wedge between David and this new woman. Part of me felt sorry for her, this woman I'd never met who was walking into the same trap I'd fallen into 15 years earlier. But mostly I felt grateful that it wasn't me anymore, that I was free from that toxic dynamic, that I'd finally chosen myself over a man who would never be able to choose me. My kids adjusted better than I'd expected. Emma especially seemed relieved that we were no longer pretending everything was fine. She'd known, of course. Kids always know when something's wrong, even when the adults try to hide it. And Lucas, though he struggled more with the change, gradually came to understand that sometimes divorce is the healthier choice, that sometimes families need to break apart so that the people in them can heal. I started therapy, worked through years of conditioning that had taught me my needs were less important than keeping the peace, that being a good wife meant swallowing my voice and my feelings. My therapist helped me understand that I'd been trained from a young age to be accommodating, to not make waves, to prioritize other people's comfort over my own well-being. And while those qualities weren't bad in themselves, they'd been weaponized against me, used to keep me compliant in a system that devalued me. It took time, but I learned to recognize red flags in relationships, to value my own judgment, to trust my instincts when something felt wrong instead of immediately doubting myself. I learned that asking for respect wasn't demanding or difficult or unreasonable. It was just basic human decency. A year after the divorce, I was at the grocery store when I ran into Sarah, David's ex-girlfriend from college. We recognized each other immediately, even though we'd only met briefly at my wedding all those years ago. "Rachel," she said, her face breaking into a smile. "I heard about the divorce. I'm so sorry it came to that, but I'm also proud of you for getting out." We grabbed coffee, spent 2 hours comparing notes on our experiences with David and his family, laughing and crying and marveling at how similar our stories were. "You know what the saddest part is?" Sarah said as we were leaving. "David's actually a good person, or he could be. But he's so enmeshed with his mother that he can't see how toxic the dynamic is. He genuinely believes that this is how families are supposed to work, that a mother should always come first, that wives should just understand and accept that they'll always be second place." I thought about her words a lot in the days that followed. Because she was right. David wasn't a villain. He was just a man who had never learned to separate himself from his mother, who had never developed the strength to stand up to her, who had been trained his entire life to believe that his mother's wishes were more important than anyone else's needs. But that didn't excuse what he'd done to me, to Sarah, to his sister's ex-husbands, to everyone who had tried to love him and be part of his life. At some point, we all have to take responsibility for our choices, even the ones that come from our family of origin, even the ones that feel comfortable because they're familiar. 2 years after the divorce, I met someone new. His name was Marcus, and he was everything David hadn't been, confident in himself, clear about his priorities, willing to have difficult conversations, and most importantly, he had healthy boundaries with his own family. The first time he invited me to a family dinner, I was terrified. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some subtle sign that I wasn't really welcome, that I was being tolerated rather than embraced. But it never came. Marcus's mother hugged me at the door, asked me genuine questions about my life, included me in conversations, treated me like I was already part of the family even though Marcus and I had only been dating for a few months. After dinner, as we were driving home, I started crying. Marcus pulled over, concerned, asking what was wrong. "Nothing's wrong," I said through my tears. "That's the problem. Nothing was wrong. Your family was so welcoming and kind and normal, and I kept waiting for it to turn bad, but it didn't. And I realized that this is how it should have always been. This is what I deserved 15 years ago, and I settled for so much less." Marcus held me while I cried, and he told me he was sorry that I'd been treated that way, that I'd had to go through so much pain to get to a place where basic kindness felt like a miracle. We got married a year later, in a small ceremony, with just our closest friends and family. Emma and Lucas stood with me, and they'd grown to love Marcus, appreciated the way he treated their mother with respect and affection, the way he included them in decisions, and never tried to replace their father, but just created space for them in his life. And treated them like they mattered. David came to the wedding, surprisingly. He'd asked permission first, said he wanted to support me, wanted to show the kids that even though we couldn't make our marriage work, we could still be respectful and kind to each other. I appreciated the gesture, though I noticed his mother wasn't with him. He told me later that she'd refused to come, had been furious that he would even consider attending his ex-wife's wedding, but for once, he'd stood his ground. It was too little, too late for us, but I was glad he was finally learning to set boundaries with her. Maybe his next relationship would have a fighting chance. The years that followed were peaceful in a way I'd never experienced before. Marcus and I built a life together based on mutual respect and open communication. When conflicts arose, we talked about them. When his family did something that bothered me, he listened and addressed it. When I needed him to stand up for me, he did, without hesitation, without making me feel like I was being unreasonable or demanding. It was such a stark contrast to my marriage with David that sometimes I still couldn't believe it was real. Emma graduated high school and went off to college, studying psychology because she said she wanted to understand family dynamics and help other people who'd grown up in toxic situations. I was so proud of her, of the strong, self-assured young woman she'd become, of the way she refused to tolerate disrespect from anyone, including her father's family. She'd learned from watching me struggle, and she'd learned from watching me finally stand up for myself. Lucas grew into a thoughtful teenager who asked questions about everything, including the divorce and what had led to it. I was honest with him, age-appropriately honest, about the patterns of exclusion and the importance of respect in relationships. He told me once that he was glad I'd left his dad, that even though it had been hard at first, he understood now that I'd made the right choice. One afternoon, about 5 years after my divorce from David, I got a phone call from Jennifer, David's sister. We hadn't spoken since the divorce proceedings, and I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. "Rachel," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "I need to apologize to you. I need you to know that I'm sorry for how we treated you, for all those years of excluding you and talking about you behind your back and supporting my mother's behavior." I was silent, not sure what to say, not sure where this was coming from. "I just went through my 3rd divorce," Jennifer continued, "and my therapist made me see the pattern. She made me see that the problem wasn't my husband's, it was us. It was my mother and the way she controls everything and everyone, and it was me for going along with it, for helping her drive away anyone who threatened her control over us. And I realized that you were right to leave. You were right to protect yourself and your kids from our toxicity." Hearing her say those words brought up emotions I thought I'd processed years ago. "Thank you for saying that. I managed finally. I appreciate the apology, though I wish it hadn't taken 3 of your marriages falling apart for you to see what was happening." Jennifer laughed, but it was bitter. I know it should have been obvious. But when you grow up in a system like that, it becomes your normal. You don't even realize how messed up it is until you're on the outside looking in, or until enough people have left you that you're forced to confront it. We talked for another hour, and by the end of the conversation, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Jennifer's apology didn't change what had happened, but it validated everything I'd felt, everything I'd known was wrong but had been gaslit into doubting. It reminded me that standing up for myself hadn't been selfish or overdramatic. It had been necessary. As I hung up the phone, Marcus came into the room and wrapped his arms around me. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded, leaning into his embrace. "Everything's more than okay," I said. "I just got the closure I didn't know I needed." Looking back now, I can see the journey clearly. I can see the woman I was 15 years ago, so eager to be loved and accepted that she was willing to make herself smaller, quieter, more convenient. I can see the years of slowly eroding self-worth, the pattern of exclusion that I normalized because I didn't want to be difficult. And I can see the moment I finally chose myself, finally said enough, finally walked away from a situation that was never going to get better. If I could go back and tell that young woman anything, it would be this: demanding respect isn't the same as causing problems. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. And a family that truly loves you will never make you fight for a seat at their table. You should never have to beg to be included in your own life. The vacation I was never invited to turned out to be the catalyst for the most important decision of my life. It forced me to see what I'd been avoiding for years, forced me to confront the reality that I'd been living in a marriage where I was tolerated rather than treasured. And while the journey out was painful, what waited on the other side was worth every difficult moment. Today, I'm surrounded by people who choose me, who include me, who treat me with the respect and dignity every person deserves. My children have learned what healthy relationships look like. And I've learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who make you feel like you're not enough, even when those people are supposed to be your family. So, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed and kept trying, or would you have found the courage to leave? Whatever your answer, I hope you remember this. You deserve to be more than an afterthought in your own life. You deserve to be celebrated, included, and loved without conditions. And if the people around you can't give you that, it's okay to find people who can. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever felt excluded by family? How did you handle it? Your story might help someone else who's going through the same thing. And if you found value in this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss our upcoming stories. Remember, you are worthy of respect, you are worthy of love, and you are worthy of being chosen every single time.